Why I know you probably think I'm a total idiot, the dumbest husband out there. But the truth is, hindsight is always 20/20ths. Like most happily married guys, I loved and trusted my wife. I had no idea that the woman I spent 8 years with, sharing so much love and happy times, was actually a selfish monster. To be more specific, one of the 3 selfish monsters. Molly's 2 sisters have been in my life basically since our first date. I never met identical triplets before, so it was pretty wild to see 3 of them who looked so much alike. When I went to pick up Molly at her place, we ran into them at the grocery store. Molly needed some herbal tea from the top shelf, but she couldn't reach it because she's only about 5 feet 4 inches and curvy with gorgeous black hair cut short. I'm a bit over 6 feet tall, so I was the obvious choice to help her out. It was a pretty crazy experience. It wasn't until our 4th date that I found out she had spotted me in the produce section, thought I was cute, and had been waiting for me by the herbal tea. It was pretty flattering, I gotta say. Even better was when she told me about it while lying naked in my arms after we had just finished making love for the first time. Our first couple of dates were amazing. We went out for dinner and talked until almost 11 p.m. So we were chilling in the park, feeding the ducks and stuff. Then we decided to catch a cheesy chick flick and held hands the whole time. Yeah, it was pretty corny, but I was totally blown away by Molly. She was like the hottest girl I've ever seen, in a good way. She had that girl next door vibe, with a smile that could make even an IIS auditor swoon. After I got her some tea, she started chatting with me like she was into me, which got me thinking I was in there. And man, I was over the moon when she agreed to go out with me next Friday. She mentioned something about having sisters, but I didn't really care at that point. Ready for 3 hot babes, when one of them opened the door and said, "Hey, you must be Scott." I was speechless. "And you're not Molly." She laughed just as charmingly as Molly did when we talked at the grocery store and said, "No, I'm Hannah. Molly, Amy, and I are triplets." Didn't she mention us? Yes, I probably did, but for some reason I haven't heard anything about the twins. Hannah laughed again. "Molly does that sometimes, she just likes to tease you." "I'll go get her, come on in." There was another girl who looked just like Amy in the living room, but it turned out to be Molly. They all had the same haircut, body shape, and big smiles, so I couldn't tell them apart until Molly came out of one of the bedrooms and greeted me. She offered me some herbal tea, and during dinner, we chatted about everything. We spent a lot of time talking about Molly and her life as a triplet. I was super interested and wanted to know all the details about what it's like for her to always have 2 lookalikes around. Man, those 2 girls are like 2 peas in a pod. They are so close, they might as well be able to read each other's minds. I mean, they are practically identical twins, you know. Have they ever pulled a switcheroo and pretended to be each other? Who knows? Molly says they can't actually read each other's minds, but they are super tight. I swear, I can almost always tell what Amy or Hannah is thinking. It's like they answer my questions before I even ask them. They've always been like that. And as for deceiving people, well, Molly just smiled and didn't say anything else. I think we used to do that kind of thing a bit. Have you ever noticed that we all have the same hairstyles? I nodded, and she kept going. When we were little girls, we loved to trick people, our teachers, relatives, even our own parents couldn't tell us apart. It was surprisingly fun, especially when Amy or Hannah got in trouble and didn't want to get in trouble. "No, Dad, I'm not Amy, I'm Molly," she would say with a grin. You can imagine how wild it drove our parents. Then in high school, we all wanted to. So me and my girls tried to switch things up for a bit cause everyone kept mixing us up. We rocked different hairstyles, took different classes and got into different stuff. Like, I was on the yearbook team, Amy was writing for the newspaper, and Hannah was killing it in field hockey. But after a while, we missed being able to swap places, so we went back to looking alike. Every now and then, I'd take a chemistry test for Amy or Hannah would do a presentation for me. It kinda helped us all out with our grades, why I know. She smiled and that's the story. Back in junior year, Brad Hendrick asked Amy out on a date. She was head over heels for him. But on the day of their date, she got sick with the flu. She was freaking out, crying and moaning, worried that he would never ask her out again if she cancelled. In the end, she convinced me to step in and be her for the evening. It wasn't too difficult because it was their first date and they didn't know each other well anyway. From that night on, Amy took the reins again and they ended up dating for almost a year. She never let him know that I was her stunt double. Years later, I totally remembered this story with so much bitterness. But back then, I was just sitting at the table across from this gorgeous, bubbly girl that I was head over heels for. And the fact that she seemed to like me back was like a freaking miracle. The three girls had all gone off to college and were loving their independence, but they also missed each other. So after college, they all moved back to Cincinnati and found a big apartment to share. That's where I went to pick up Molly for our date. So, basically, I met her sisters first and then fast forward 8 years, Molly and I started dating, fell in love, and got married. 2 years later, I was feeling like the luckiest person alive. I had a job at a graphic design firm where I was more tech-savvy than the older guys in charge, so I was making good money. We were able to afford a nice 3-bedroom house in Oakley Square, just a few miles from our work downtown. And guess what? Our neighbors were none other than Molly's sisters. 3 years after Molly and I tied the knot. Amy tied the knot with this tall, kinda dull dude named Ted who worked in finance. He was nice enough, just not the most exciting. They lived next door to us at the end of Ferdinand Place, a dead-end street. Their backyard faced the backyard of the house on Oak Park Place, where guess who lived? Hannah, obviously, with her hubby Arnold. Ari was totally different from Ted. He was older than us, a short, happy guy who owned a bunch of bowling alleys. Down in Cincy, he used to puff on cigars until Hannah put her foot down. He was a hoot, always cracking crude jokes and great to be around. They tied the knot just a bit before Amy and Ted did. It was no shock to us husbands that our wives wanted to live practically on top of each other. It was like they were joined at the hip. Ted, Ari, and I were used to them always finishing each other's sentences or saying the same thing at the same time. We've just gotten used to their constant need to hang out together. Every night, around 9:30 or 10 p.m., we all gather in one of our 3 kitchens to chat before hitting the hay. We shoot the breeze for a bit, then head back to our own homes. Even after 8 years of living with Molly, I still can't tell which one of the triplets is who. Ted and Ari have the same issue. We've gotten pretty good at recognizing which wife is wearing what clothes or jewelry. When we celebrated Christmas with Pam and Donald, it was obvious that our parents had just as much trouble telling us apart as we did. But that doesn't mean we were all the same. Amy was a bit of a tough cookie, more proper and old-fashioned compared to her sisters. Hannah, on the other hand, was a wild child. She partied harder, told dirtier jokes, and was probably the one most likely to end up dancing at a strip club out of all of us, although I don't think she ever did. Then there was Molly, who was somewhere in the middle. I always thought she was just right, sweeter and more outgoing than Amy, but also more sensible. So basically, Hannah and her sisters are so alike that you couldn't even tell them apart by looks or voice. They were always trying to trick you, but since none of us had kids back then, it was easy to plan vacations. Molly and her sisters insisted that all 6 of us go on vacation together every summer, so we would spend 2 weeks in cool places like Las Vegas or a beach resort up north. When we were in Carolina or Italy for a year, our group got along pretty well, so the husbands didn't have a problem. But in return, I made sure to go on a trip with just Molly for a week every year, just the 2 of us, no Amy, no Hannah, no brothers-in-law. At first, this caused a lot of arguments and awkward silences, but after a while, Molly finally realized I was serious. It actually took 3 years for everything to work out. I love your sisters and I enjoy hanging out with Ari and Ted, but I wish I had more time for myself. Just between us, is it really so difficult to understand? Here's the deal, you get a 2-week trip with all of us every year, and I get 1 week with you alone. I must have given that speech 10 times, but it wasn't until the day before our trip to Italy when Molly came home from work and saw that I hadn't even started packing that she finally gave in. That was our argument. I told her firmly that if she didn't agree to spend a week alone with me, I would just stay home. She and the other 2 couples can go to Italy without me, no problem. An hour of yelling went by without me saying anything, and I made about 20 calls to Amy and Hannah. Both of Molly's sisters came to help calm me down, but I wouldn't budge. They kept telling me how selfish and foolish I was acting, and that a loving husband wouldn't be so stubborn. Eventually, Molly gave in to my request and we went to Italy. For a few days, things were tense between us, and her sisters made sure I knew I was in the doghouse. If it weren't for the support from Eri and Ted, I was low-key pumped about winning because it meant my buddies would get some sweet proposals from their wives too. I almost bailed and headed home early, but by the 5th day, Florence's charm got to Molly and the rest of the trip was epic. Just like our awesome week on Sanibel Island next winter. After that, we started a tradition of spending 2 weeks with Molly's sisters every year and 1 week without them. Sounds perfect, right? Well, that's when the trouble began as we started trying to figure things out. We always knew we wanted kids, but we were having too much fun just being a couple or hanging out with our 2 other couple friends to rush into it. But when Molly and her sisters hit 30 and I was 32, the baby fever hit. She stopped taking the pills and a few months later, we started trying to make a baby. I was totally on board with the idea and the process. I've always loved having sex with my incredible wife. Our sex life was usually really intimate and loving. Back in the day, me and my partner had a few go-to positions that we loved. But as the years went by, those wild and fun nights became less frequent, like it does for most married couples. Every now and then, Molly would catch me off guard by coming to bed all hot and bothered, and we'd end up having multiple rounds of sex in one night. We always celebrated special occasions with champagne, which really got her going. But for the most part, our intimate moments were more sweet and loving, and that was just fine by me. Last night, after she basically had her way with me, I teased her about it and found out she wasn't too happy. It was Saturday, and when I got back from the store with dinner, I heard her calling me from the bedroom. I found her lying naked on the bed, holding a bottle of massage oil. "I'm feeling a bit tense today, cowboy," she mumbled. "Think you could help me out?" It was incredible. I massaged her back and legs really well as she moaned in pleasure. Then I flipped her over and started working on her with my fingers. Then I spent a lot of time pleasuring her with my mouth and tongue until she came 3 times. After that, we had intense sex until I reached ecstasy. We lay together for a while, feeling dreamy. Molly went to the kitchen and got us some snacks. Dinner was no longer on the table. We started fooling around again once we caught our breath, smiling at each other. I said, "Wow, that was amazing, Molly." Then I joked that maybe she wasn't Molly and I just got lucky with Amy or Hannah tonight. I wasn't sure. Molly was so pumped up, she couldn't even see that I was just messing around. Instead of laughing or giving me some sass back, she shot me a death stare. "Scott, this is not cool. How could you even think I would do something like that? Do you really think I'd ever share you with my sisters?" As she glared at me, I swear the room got chilly by like 10 degrees. "Molly, I'm sorry," I said. "I was just joking, babe." I tried to hug her, but she backed away and stood up. "I'm gonna go take a shower," she said. She was still super pissed at me and stormed off to the bathroom. I heard the lock click behind her and she stayed in there all night and most of the next day, ignoring me. Molly was dead set on showing me that certain things weren't funny. Finally, at dinner on Sunday, I said sorry again, insisting it was just a harmless joke. She seemed to chill out a bit after that. That night, she let me cuddle up to her in bed and I was relieved. I hate it when Molly's mad at me, so I made a mental note to watch my jokes in the future. Hey, just a heads up, don't ever joke about swapping sisters again. It may have seemed funny at first, but she got really mad when I brought it up on our first date. She told me a story about pretending to be Amy on a date with a guy in high school. And then, a few weeks before our wedding, the topic came up again. Molly and I couldn't agree on something small, like which hotel to stay at for our honeymoon in Karaka. I ended up giving in to her, but during our playful argument, I jokingly suggested that if she didn't want me, maybe I'd marry her sister instead. So, she was teasing me about her sisters not wanting me because they don't sleep deeply. I mentioned that they might not take me since I snore sometimes, which could be a deal breaker. She said, "Fine, then stay with me." I replied, "Okay, if I can't have Amy or Hannah, then I'll just marry you." And that was that. I had no clue why she got so mad years later when I made the same joke. But, like I said, it all started when we tried to have a baby. My life got flipped upside down when we decided to start trying for a baby. We gave it a shot and had a blast for about 10 months. I had heard that some couples take a while to conceive, so I wasn't stressing about it. But Molly started getting anxious about our lack of success and made me go see our doctor for a checkup. So I went, had a good time flipping through some adult magazines in the waiting room, got tested, and then waited for the phone call a few days later. It finally came on a Friday while I was at work. I closed my office door and had a quick chat with Dr. Rennell. "Well, Scott, you don't stress, mate. The doc said your sperm count is a bit lower than usual, about 70% of what's normal for a 30-year-old guy. But he reckons there's no need to worry, your swimmers are healthy and strong, just not as plentiful. You and Molly shouldn't have any problems getting pregnant, it might just take a bit longer than for some couples." I was relieved to hear that and couldn't wait to get home and reassure Molly. But for some reason, I completely forgot about it during dinner and ended up chatting about the politics of Cincinnati all night. I totally spaced on it, and then it hit me around 11 o'clock that night when the sisters were having their usual get-together in the kitchen. I was watching basketball on TV and then went to bed. I usually comped out before Molly woke up, but right as I was about to pass out, I remembered the news about my sperm count and felt like I had to tell Molly right then and there. So I threw on my robe, headed downstairs, and decided to interrupt the kitchen chat to reassure Molly that everything was all good. As I walked from the living room to the kitchen, I heard the three sisters laughing loudly. I smiled to myself, thinking about how much fun they were having together. Instead of going straight to the kitchen, I stopped for a moment to listen in on their conversation. It was all in good fun, I promise. I was just too curious to hear what they were chatting about so happily. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I couldn't resist eavesdropping. I was just about to listen to voice number 1. "Well, if he's not the best, why do you always want to swap with me?" Voice number 2 giggled. "I didn't say that Ari isn't the best. I just said that he doesn't touch private parts as skillfully as Scott does." Voice number 3, or is it still number 2? "I can't tell," chimed in. "Besides, you greedy cow, you still get Ari more nights every week than any of us, plus the weekend." Another voice interrupted. "So you probably shouldn't complain about your situation." More laughter ensued as I stood there. Man, I was totally shocked. I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. They were saying they swapped husbands and had sex with each other. I just sat there, stunned, trying to process it all. It's been almost a year, and I still think Molly should be the one to do it, not Scott. "Do you have a backup plan?" "Yeah, if Scott's sperm test doesn't come back normal. He got tested a week ago, so we should find out soon." "How are we going to handle this?" "Don't worry, I'll figure it out. Spending nights with Ted when I'm most fertile is getting a bit dull. Switching it up with Scott every night is boring, and when I know I'm safe at the end of my cycle, I want to spend a couple of nights with Ari. But hey, no way am I going to mess things up by getting pregnant with Ari before I'm ready. Haha, you won't see Ari again until I'm knocked up." It was too early for me to get mad, so I just tried not to believe it. The only thing I could figure out from what I heard was that Molly planned for Ted to get her pregnant. I finally realized what was going on. Ted and I were like two peas in a pod, even though he was a few inches taller than me. We both had the same hair and eye color, and our bodies were pretty similar too. Ari, on the other hand, was shorter and heavier. I was frozen in fear, sitting on a chair in a dark living room, watching my once happy marriage fall apart right before my eyes. My mind was racing, and then it hit me, the gossip session in the kitchen was going downhill fast. I quietly slipped away to the bedroom, climbed back into bed, and laid there in shock. I knew I couldn't face Molly without thinking things through first, and besides, who even knows what she would say? I knew which sister was gonna come cuddle up with me, so I kept my breathing steady. A few minutes later, one of the girls slipped into bed, thinking I was already knocked out. She gave me a little kiss on the cheek and whispered, "I love you, baby," just like Molly used to do before bed. I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from yelling at her, "Like you sneaky. How can you explain sleeping with two of my brothers-in-law?" But I stayed quiet, controlling my breathing, waiting for her to doze off. After a few minutes, I heard her. Molly or whoever's breathing slowed down, so I waited a whole hour to make sure she was knocked out before getting her up. I was thinking about how they could make this whole thing work, and it hit me right away that it wouldn't be that hard if they just swapped husbands for some action. They could switch clothes during their evening meetups. They all only worked part-time as co-managers at the interior design store, so none of them left the house in the morning before Eri, Ted, and me. Changing clothes in the morning would be a piece of cake, the only. It was a bit tricky because on weekends we were either spending time with our wives or planning to switch to another day. But we always managed to meet up for a barbecue brunch or hang out together almost every weekend. And if not, we would make a quick trip to my sister's to grab the catalog she had for me, or come up with some other excuse. Figuring out the logistics wasn't hard, but I was confused about the reasons behind it. You'd think us husbands would have noticed the difference, right? Listen, man, you gotta be able to tell your wife apart from some other woman, for God's sake. But here's the deal, we never had a reason to be suspicious. I never doubted who was in my bed before. And you know what else? Early on in our marriage, Molly and I used to love just lying in bed at night and talking. We'd talk about our relationship, our future plans, work, family, everything. But now, everything's different. I don't know anymore. So, a few years ago Molly started shutting down late-night chats. She'd come into the bedroom after chilling with her sisters and we'd just hit the hay. Maybe we'd fool around, maybe not, but whenever I tried to chat she'd be all, "I'm too tired, babe, let's talk about it tomorrow." All our serious talks, like about our days or future plans, happened over dinner or earlier in the evening, never in bed late at night. This was probably a trend for a while. Okay, so basically, I had this sneaky plan because whenever women change partners, they talk less. And the less they talk, the less chance there is of the wife getting caught not knowing something or forgetting stuff from the past. So, one night when I was sure Molly was knocked out, I crept into the office, grabbed the ink pad we use for our checks and put some permanent black ink on my finger. Then, back in the bedroom, I slyly made a little mark on her back, on the right side near her shoulder blade. I saw a tiny bump on her shoulder, like the size of a pencil eraser. She wouldn't have even noticed it if she hadn't checked her back in the mirror. I went to the bathroom and tried washing it off with warm water and soap, but the ink stain didn't budge much. I rubbed the pumice stone on my finger for a bit longer until it faded enough to not be noticeable. Climbing back into bed, I smirked at myself as I thought about what to do next. The initial shock had worn off and I was feeling more calm. I was fuming when I realized from the ladies' chat that Molly had been backstabbing me for ages, along with her sisters. They were all putting their own clique before their commitment to love and loyalty to their husbands. I felt played, lied to, embarrassed. I racked my brain trying to figure out how to fix this mess, but couldn't see a way out. On Saturday afternoon, we had a barbecue at Ted's place. I bided my time until the ladies went inside to cook, while Ted was busy working on something. I was grilling and I asked Eri if he wanted to go for a walk around the block. He's always a bit worried about his weight, so he was happy to get some exercise. When we were far enough from the house, I said, "Eri, can we chat about something personal for a sec? Is that cool?" "Sure, Scott, what's up?" "First off, let's keep this between us, okay? I don't want Molly, Hannah, Amy, or Ted knowing we had this convo. So if anyone asks her." During our walk, we were chatting about possibly going on a trip next summer to Greece. Eri seemed happy with the idea and said he'll keep it a secret. Then he awkwardly brought up your sex life with Hannah. I told him Molly and I get it on once or twice a week, but I wish it was more frequent. Just curious if her sisters are in the same boat. Eri gave me a pat on the back and said with a grin, "Man, you really lucked out with the short end of the stick, mate. Hannah and I do this pretty much every night, well, almost every night. I mean, sometimes we skip a night when she's on her period or when one of us is just too tired. But other than that, it's like clockwork." He saw my face and grinned, saying, "You picked the wrong sister, huh? How could you have known?" "I guess I was just lucky." I kept a disappointed look on my face to hide the rage I was feeling. I replied, "I think so, Arnie. Tell me, has it always been like this?" Since the start of their marriage, he's been thinking about it a lot, like almost every day. Hannah and I have this little routine or game we play, you could say. You know how girls gather in someone's kitchen in the evenings? I nodded and he went on to say that by the time she gets back, I'm usually already in bed reading or watching TV. And when she comes into the bedroom, she looks at me with this look on her face and always says the same thing in a seductive voice, "Well, big boy, what do you want? Hit me up tonight and I'll propose something, then we'll probably end up doing the same old thing. How do you want it tonight?" I know it sounds dumb, but as long as we're getting busy, I ain't complaining. He chuckled loudly and I tried to laugh along. "One more thing," I said. "Molly and I used to have deep talks in bed about ourselves, our relationships, and all that, but lately it's mostly just sex and sleep. We don't really talk anymore. Is it the same with Hannah? It feels like we've lost that connection. Let's save the deep talks about relationships for another time. It's no big deal for me. But it's kinda like you and Molly." He chuckled a bit. We went to the bedroom for some action, then fell asleep as we headed back to the house. Ari mostly talked about the Cincinnati Bengals, his other love besides Hannah. I tried to nod and agree at the right times, but my mind was elsewhere, in a cold, dark, lonely place, and I was really pissed off. I barely kept it together. I spent the whole afternoon and evening keeping it together, even though people could tell I was a bit distant. I was dead set on making it through another day. So, after we left Ted and Amy, I took Molly out for some Indian food, her fave, and tried my best to be a happy camper all night long. Around 10 p.m., Molly did her usual thing and hung out with Amy and her sisters for a bit. When she got back and we were getting ready for bed, I snuck up behind her, gave her a little neck and shoulder rub, and checked for any signs of trouble. Nope, nothing there. All right, it's all good now, I thought. Damn, whoever you are, it's time for you and your crew to feel the heat. "Hey, how's that scratch on your leg?" asked Molly. She tensed up a bit and cautiously replied, "Yeah, it's from yesterday after dinner when I bumped into the dishwasher door." I leaned in and said, "Let me take a look." "Check out her feet." "Oh my God," she said nonchalantly. "Everything's all good, not even a trace left." "Yeah, you're right," I replied, examining closely. "I don't see anything either." "That's awesome." It looked gross before. I stood up straight and saw her let out a sigh of relief. I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, smirking to myself. There was no scratch, and her reaction just confirmed that whoever was in my room today wasn't the same person as yesterday. A few minutes later, I was just chilling in bed, waiting for her to come out of the bathroom. "Hey honey," I said, "let's pick up where we left off last night. It was amazing." "What do you mean, honey?" she replied, looking a bit suspicious. "Don't you remember? You came downstairs with a twinkle in your eye and said something like, 'So, big boy, how do you want me tonight?' It was so hot. I was like, well, maybe giving my manhood some credit wouldn't hurt. And then you pushed me back onto the bed, teasing and caressing me until I went crazy. You got on top of me and rode me like a wild woman. God, that was amazing. Do you remember that, Molly?" She looked shocked for a second, then a look of pain crossed her face as she quickly thought of an excuse. "Of course, honey. I remember. I'm just not sure I'm up for something so intense again tonight." "Okay," I said. "Let's take it slow and gentle instead. But please, tell me those sweet things you said last night." She climbed into bed and hugged me, holding me close. I told her to stop hiding her face, baby. She whispered, "I'll say whatever you want, I just like to turn you on." I laughed to myself, knowing she wouldn't get away with it that easily. "Oh, you know what I'm talking about," I said. She stayed quiet as we touched each other, getting me all worked up despite being mad. But guess what? Molly was having a hard time getting in the mood. My usual moves weren't doing it for her at all. "Hey babe, you look a bit off today. Everything all right?" I asked innocently, catching her gaze. "Sorry Scott, I'm just feeling a bit tired and my stomach's bothering me, probably from that spicy food. Let's get it on, but don't expect me to be all wild and crazy today, okay?" I smiled lovingly and said, "Of course, Molly. Let's do it missionary style, softly and tenderly. We can save all your hot words for another night." She kissed me with passion. Man, what happened next was just your typical, everyday enjoyable sex between a married couple, like it had been plenty of times before with my wife Molly. Or at least I thought it was my wife Molly. Sunday was when everything went south. All three couples had brunch planned downtown at Trentino, a spot we all liked, and then we went back to Ari and Hannah's place. The guys watched the Bengals game while the ladies chatted and laughed all day. I couldn't have been happier. But I spent the whole morning keeping a close eye on Molly, making sure she didn't even bother to give her sisters a heads up before showing up, and I could tell she was pissed. She was convinced that my Friday night hookup hadn't spilled the beans about the scratch on her leg or the crazy sex we had. We were all sitting in the Trentino restaurant, ordering drinks, when Molly gave her sister a look and said, "Hannah, I need to pee. Come with me." And off they went, leaving Molly looking angry and gloomy, and Hannah looking a bit confused. It took them a while to come back, and when they did, they looked all pale and stressed out. They were all awkward with their drinks and kept getting distracted during the convo. They were trying not to look at me, but I caught them shooting intense glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I could tell Molly was probably mad at Hannah for not spilling the beans about what went down between me and her the night before. Hannah tried to play it off like nothing happened, but they were both freaking out. Only Amy seemed chill and unbothered. So, we were all just chilling and chatting with her sisters and stuff, having a good time. But then, out of nowhere, she totally changed her vibe. She didn't say what was up, but you could tell something was off. We were chowing down on our breakfast, eggs Benedict, salmon omelette, and Belgian waffles, when she casually asked Hannah to check on one of her contacts that was bugging her. When they came back a few minutes later, her sisters were looking all pale and stressed out. They wouldn't even look at me or join in on the convo. Something was definitely up with them. Man, I was on edge all day, but it was awesome when Ted, Eri, and I were watching the Bengals actually win a game for once. The girls were hiding in the back of the house and didn't say a peep for hours. When it was time to leave, neither of my sisters-in-law could even look me in the eye when we said goodbye. Dinner at our place was quiet, but I tried to keep things light by telling Molly funny stories about work and our upcoming vacation plans. I could barely crack a smile or grunt out short responses at the right times. I could tell she was freaked out the whole evening while we were tidying up the kitchen and watching TV. I acted like everything was cool, but I could see the fear and dread in Molly's eyes. Around 9:15 p.m., she said, "Honey, I'm gonna go see Hannah for a bit, okay?" "Sure, baby, while you're out, I'll probably pack my stuff and throw it in the car. I'll need a truck for the furniture and stuff, so I'll do that later in the week." And just like that, the color drained from her face. "Scott, what the hell are you talking about? Why are you packing your stuff?" I answered nonchalantly, "Because I'm leaving, obviously. Do you really think I'm gonna keep living in a house with a lying, cheating?" She gasped and looked at me. "Honey, I don't understand." I just stared back at her, cutting her off. She obviously understood, but didn't know how to finish her sentence. "See you when you get back," I said, heading towards the stairs. "No, Scott, wait," she screamed, her voice trembling, but I just ignored her. So, I left her and went to pack my stuff. I knew her next move would be to call her sisters, and I was spot on. In less than 3 minutes, Molly showed up at the bedroom door looking like a mess, with tears on her cheeks and her makeup smudged. She seemed really scared and sad, and for a split second, I actually felt bad for her. "Sure," I replied, turning away. "I'll be down in a minute." I quickly glanced around the room for a way out. So basically, I had this tiny digital voice recorder, like the size of a pack of smokes, that I used sometimes to jot down notes while driving. I'd set it to record and just pop it in my pocket. When I got to the kitchen, there were already 3 women at the table, all looking stressed out and unhappy. I sat down, looked at each of them, and asked, "So?" There was a long awkward silence, none of them wanting to speak up. Finally, Molly blurted out, "Scott, you know I love you, right?" I replied coldly, "Which sister are you?" She yelled back, "I'm Molly, your wife." "Yo, hold up a sec." I went around to check out her back, no black spots. I did the same with the other 2 sisters and one of them had a mark. They all looked at me like, "What?" So I sat back down and was like, "All right, let's say you're Molly. Where were you sleeping on Friday when your sister was here?" I pointed to the one with the mark and she said she was in bed with me. They all just stared at me. I was like, "Take your time, no rush. I'm sure there's a logical explanation." "All right, so can someone please explain to me why 2, if not 3, of you have crashed in my bed for the past 3 nights?" Molly was silent for a while, then started crying, while the other two just looked all gloomy. I acted like I was gonna get up and pack my stuff, saying, I need to pack my things. But then Molly was like, wait, I'll explain, just give me a chance to make you understand, Scott. I wanted to yell at her that it was too late for an explanation, but deep down, I really just wanted to hear what she had to say. Like, what kind of messed up reasoning was going on here? What could those three offer for what they were doing, and would they tell me the truth? I waited, but Molly was crying too much to talk. One of her sisters spoke up instead. It was just a dumb game, Scott, she said. It started as a joke, but I don't know, it kind of spiraled out of control. And you, Hannah, it was just teasing, you know. About a month ago, we were joking about each other's husbands, what we like and don't like about them. And then we started talking about sex, and somehow it just escalated. So, like, we all decided to try something different, you know. It might sound dumb now, but at first, we were just messing around, teasing each other, like daring each other to do stuff. Like, you're too scared to do that. And then, after a few weeks, things got more real. Molly and Amy were keeping an eye on Hannah as she spilled the beans. Basically, it all went down on a Friday night. We swapped clothes when we met up in the kitchen, then headed to each other's houses. Amy went with you, I went with Ted, and Molly was with Ari. Then, on Saturday, we switched it up again. Barbecue was a disaster, Scott. We all know that now and you're probably pissed off, but please let Molly make things right. She really loves you, just look at how miserable she is. She pointed to her sister who was crying nonstop. I told them Amy was with me and Molly was with Ari, they all agreed. I asked Amy how it was with me compared to good old Ted. Amy looked shocked and said she didn't know. I asked her to refresh my memory about what happened between us. Hey, couldn't even look me in the eye. I can't believe you don't remember what happened just 2 nights ago. For the first time in your marriage, you switched husbands with one of your sisters and now you're acting like you've got Alzheimer's or something. I looked at Hannah and told her she's full of it. It was actually Amy in my bed on Friday night, I even marked her with black ink while she was asleep and the mark is still there. But we didn't hook up at all, and I wouldn't want to anyway. Seriously, trying to play me for a fool on top of everything else you 3 clowns pulled by lying to me that it was the first time. You think I don't know that you 3 admitted Ari is the best in bed? They were shocked, but I brushed it off and kept going. You think I don't know he's with one of you 3 every night, and me less than twice a week? But hey, I get the consolation prize, right? I get to touch your goodies whenever you feel like it. I paused to see their reaction. Molly was bawling her eyes out and her sisters were just staring at her with serious faces. I was getting fed up, but I needed them to come clean. You get one more chance, I told them. Tell me the truth, and this time I want to hear it from Molly. How long have you been cheating on me with each other's husbands? Molly looked at me with tears in her eyes, begging. I waited in silence as she hesitated. Finally, she turned away and looked at the table. It's been many years since Hannah and Ari's wedding, she confessed. There was silence once again as I waited for Hannah to speak. It wasn't her fault, Scott. Amy and I kept pushing her, but it was just occasional, like Molly insisting a few times a year. Okay, I said. So what's next? Nobody wanted to tell me, so it started happening more often. Yeah, Amy finally said, reluctantly. So you 3 were sharing husbands like in a little round dance, huh? Asked Molly. She sadly nodded. And when did it become 7 nights a week for Ari and casual sex for me? She didn't answer or even look at me. How many of those 7 nights was Ari spending with you? Molly, you're with someone new every week, huh? Just great, I mumbled. I told you, I've had enough of hearing about it. There's no point in listening anymore. It's just about sex, honey, she said, looking at me with desperation. It's got nothing to do with love, nothing to do with how much I love you, or how we love each other. And it's definitely got nothing to do with getting pregnant either. She was out of breath and her sisters looked concerned. Scott, what do you think you're doing? Do you really think I'm that clueless? That you were going to end up pregnant with Ted's baby because of your affair? I never thought I could do it, but she was shocked. She said no, Scott, and got up, walked around the table to hug me. I stood up and pushed her away, and she tripped over the refrigerator. You don't ever touch me again. You betrayed me in every way possible with the help of your two sisters. Now the three of you can have Ari and Ted unless you decide to add a new guy to your collection. Before they could respond, I quickly went through the swing door and out of the kitchen. I grabbed my suitcase and walked away. I walked out the front door and never saw them again, but I could hear crying coming from the kitchen. I spent a pissed off, sleepless night in a crappy hotel room, and the next morning I called in sick to work. I went to see a lawyer and then went to the bank to make an appointment to meet Ari and Ted for lunch. I was so urgent about it that Ted had to cancel our original meeting. We sat in a booth at the diner and ordered sandwiches. And then, without wasting any time, I told them, guys, I don't know if you'll believe this, but our wives cheated on us. They moved into bed with someone else. So, the three of us, it seems like this has been happening for a few years now. Ari was totally shocked, but to my surprise, Ted just nodded and said he had a feeling something like that was going on. I didn't want to believe it, but we both just stared at him. What made you suspicious? She asked. Well, there were just too many times when Amy forgot something or didn't remember a conversation from earlier that day or the night before. I wasn't sure, of course, and I wasn't gonna accuse anyone until I had solid proof. So, I made a note of all the things she forgot. I figured that when I have some solid evidence, I'll fill you in too. Anyway, how did you find out? He asked. I told him about the chat I overheard and then mentioned the ink mark trick. Ted looked deep in thought, and Ari kept saying, unbelievable, Lord, unbelievable. When I finished, he said, are you sure, Scott? I mean, this is so insane. I replied, here's a recording of the convo I had with them last night, and played the tape without saying anything more. Once it was over, we all looked at each other with a sense of dread. Me and the guys, Ari and Ted, got real serious. They called their jobs and told them they were taking the day off. I dropped the bomb that I'm splitting up with Molly, no turning back now. They didn't know what to do yet. We talked for a while and I realized, surprisingly, that I've never felt closer to my two brothers-in-law. They are good dudes and I'll miss them. I found a cool apartment, went back with a truck, grabbed some of our stuff, and moved in. By the end of the week, I had packed up the rest of my clothes. So, Molly kept blowing up my phone at work and on my cell. I had my assistant ignore her calls and got a new number for my cell, but kept my apartment's number on the down low. It was a smart move. I also filed for divorce and started making plans for my future. Then, on Thursday, Barbara from work had this weird chat with me. I was obviously not in a good mood at the office, but she still had to ask what was up. I pretty much spilled the whole story to her. When I saw her face, she looked surprised, sympathetic, and kind of twistedly pleased. It pissed me off, so I said to her, I'm so sorry, Scott. She replied, of course I'm not happy about what they did to you. She seemed a bit embarrassed as she continued, it's just I always had this idea that you and I could, be a good couple. I just stared at her. Barbara wasn't just a great person, she was generous, funny, tall, and really beautiful. I always kind of knew she was attractive, but I was so in love with Molly that I didn't even think about it. I didn't even consider it at first, but then it hit me that maybe it was worth considering. Me and her had a little chat, keeping everything on the down low. But Barbara caught on that I was seeing her in a whole new light. My lawyer, Molly, was all pleading and desperate for a sit-down to explain everything. I was pretty sure she wouldn't say anything to change the situation, but I agreed to meet with her anyways. And surprise, surprise, I was right. We were alone in my lawyer's office about 6 weeks after I moved. I just sat there, waiting for her to speak. Hey, girl, she walked in looking sad but still so stunning. I waited for her to sit down and then I asked, Molly, how are you doing? Are you already knocked up with Ted's baby? She blushed and said, no, Scott, I'm not hooking up with Ted or anyone else. And I'm not planning on getting pregnant by anyone but you. I reminded her of that night when I overheard her in the kitchen, and I was just about to tell her that Dr. Randall said my swimmers were good, a bit low, but strong enough to make babies. So, there's no need to rely on Ted's help. On the other hand, you still me and Ari were hooking up regularly, so I don't think it matters much. She was already on the verge of tears. Please, Scott, let me explain everything. Can I tell you how sorry I am and how awful I feel? Do you think you feel worse than me, Molly? She looked at me sadly and shook her head. Okay, I said with a sigh, go on. But do me a favor, don't tell me how much you love me. Don't tell me this has nothing to do with us. Just don't, okay? But Scott, this had nothing to do with you. So, like, it was me and Hannah and Amy just doing this crazy thing we've always done since school. It's like our little game, not meant to hurt anyone. Have you ever done this with all your boyfriends? Almost every guy we met for a while, my sisters and I have always been super close. Sharing everything, clothes, gossip, friends, even boyfriends. I just sat there quietly, letting her keep talking. When we got married, I thought it would stop, and it did. Wait a sec, I gotta ask, did your sisters hook up with me while we were dating? She blushed and admitted, yeah, a couple times. I wasn't really into it, especially when things got serious between us, but they were pushy and we always shared before. So I guess I must have passed the test since you didn't dump me, I said sarcastically. She didn't respond. Molly, you really don't get it, do you? You played me for a fool just so you and your sisters could have some fun. You've been screwing around behind my back. Ari was with you instead of me for years because he was better in bed than me. Have you ever thought about how that makes me feel? What the hell is so great about it? Actually, don't answer that. I don't want to hear it. Her lips were trembling, Scott. I know it was awful, but you also had sex with all three of us. I didn't know that, you idiot. Haven't you realized this yet? Even if we talked about swapping partners, which I would never agree to, if we did it, I would still get pleasure and excitement from having sex with other women. Hey, I didn't realize it wasn't you, Molly. To me, it was always you, not some new and exciting person. You were the woman I loved more than anything in the world. I was getting so frustrated because she just didn't get it. I told her, it's simple. I was your husband, you should have put me first before anyone else. Our relationship should have been the most important, but that didn't happen. You put Hannah and Amy before me, you put sex with Ari. Can you believe she was planning to get Ted pregnant behind my back? I've had it with her. When I tried to walk out, she begged me to stay, saying she didn't want them, she wanted me. Well, isn't that just great? After all this time, she finally picks me over her sisters. But now it's my turn to choose, and I choose to be done with the woman who lied and cheated on me, making me look like a fool for years. Man, she was living the good life. She was bawling her eyes out with her face buried in her hands, but didn't try to stop me as I walked towards the door after our talk. It hit me that life could be simpler moving forward. I started seeing Barbara, and on our third date, I realized there were other women out there besides Molly and her sisters who I could have a good time with in bed. Barbara was full of energy and appreciation, and our first night together turned into a wild weekend. It was steamy, it was fun, but I had no clue if it would turn into something serious. Man, it really made me feel better. We still hang out and hook up regularly, but we are taking things slow. Barbara is pretty understanding of my confusion right now and she's not pushing me, which I appreciate. Ari decided not to kick Hannah out, not really surprising I guess. I mean, he was her first choice in bed after all. The revelations about what they were doing weren't as bad for him as they were for Ted and me. But he did make Hannah grow out her hair long, so there's that. He warned her not to mess around with her sisters without him knowing. He said if she did it again with me, Ted, or anyone else, she would be broke. He also mentioned he wouldn't mind hooking up with Amy or Molly occasionally, but only when he wanted, not when they wanted. Ari said Hannah looked really mad when he said that, but she didn't say anything. She knows she's in trouble. He told me with a smirk that Ted found a way to hurt Amy the most out of all of them. He didn't mean to do it on purpose, he just got offered a great job in Chicago. He told Amy he was moving there in 3 weeks and gave her the choice to come with him and work on their marriage with a counselor, or stay in Cincinnati with her sisters. Now Amy is torn, she doesn't want to let go of Ted but she can't imagine living without her sisters. It's a tough situation if you ask me. Screw him and all 3 of them. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so your partner doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the Skip this story, it's nothing compared to the next one. And if you're under 18, definitely don't listen to the next one.